Greetings and welcome to the Arkham Sessions. My name is Dr. Andrea Letamendi. I am the voice of psychological reasoning on the show. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Brian Ward, who's often the voice of everything else.
Yeah, that's me. Of all non-psychological reasoning.
We are absolutely thrilled to be back doing the show. We had a couple weeks off, actually due to a personal tragedy for both of us. We lost a family member, so to speak, a pet, a cat who we had grown to love for many, many years. So we had a couple of weeks of, unfortunately, of great sadness and tragedy. And I'm actually, I find it maybe not so much a coincidence, but the show today is dealing with the love of cats. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting way to come back, but like anything involving Batman, I come back with some passion for this, with some hope to provide some information about psychological science, of course, and about our fandom for Batman. So I'm really happy to be back with you doing the show.
Thank you. And I'm also happy. And yeah, it's really rough. It's not an easy episode to come back to. It's unfortunate that it's this one, but at the same time, it's a little fitting, dealing with Catwoman and dealing with, someone who believes that cats are better than humans, not unlike Man-Bat, where it was believed that bats were better than humans. And I don't know. It's a little weird, but I'm glad that we're back. I'm glad that we're talking about it. And I think it would be safe to say that this episode of the Arkham Sessions is dedicated to our loved one, Anya.
I agree with that. I think that's a great way to start this.
We do have a few things that we can talk about in the last couple of weeks that we've not been around. The last place that you and I went together to check out, it was a convention. It was Stan Lee's Kamikaze. And I don't know, it was the fourth year of Kamikaze. It's the third time that I've been. It's the third time that we've been. And it seemed to be bigger. It seemed to be a little better. It was certainly more organized than years past. They might be on their way to actually having a pretty solid convention on their hands. A lot of people seem to enjoy it, both attendees and even exhibitors this year. So I don't know what you thought about that one, but you had a pretty great panel while you were there.
Right. As far as panels go, I was a panelist on a panel called End Bullying, Bring Out the Inner Superhero. And a colleague and friend of mine, Chase Masterson, who of course folks know from Star Trek Deep Space Nine,
yep,
and some Doctor Who projects, is a co-collaborator with Carrie Goldman. And they have, for the last couple of years, brought to comic conventions this important information about prevention and intervention of bullying. And it's always a great pleasure to work with them. Unfortunately, Carrie was not there, but I was able to see Chase. The folks from No Hate, the No Hate campaign, were there.
Sure.
And Jordan Gorfinkel, who used to work with DC, actually working on Batman and Birds of Prey. So it was a really nice way to come back to a convention and to talk about something very positive and inspiring. And there were some young folks, some adolescents in the audience who had questions around, what to do when they're being bullied and how to address it, at a point where they're still kind of developing and still growing into their own and trying to understand how they can still love things like comic books and Batman and try to protect themselves essentially from being bullied for those things.
Sure. And it's always a great opportunity to see you talk with Chase and the gang about bullying. This is a very serious topic, especially now these days where just by being online, you can be bullied to no end. And it's great that Chase and Carrie have come together to form this coalition, and they're going from convention to convention. I know they've done Comic-Con, they've done New York Comic-Con, they're now doing Stan Lee's Kamikaze. And I think that is crucial for parents. It's crucial for the kids that are being bullied. It is great work that they're doing, and I'm glad that they had you on board.
Why, thank you.
I guess our last episode that we left off on was our live episode from San Diego Comic Fest. It was Joker's Wild. And that one was a fun one. If you've not heard it yet, please take the opportunity, go check it out, because it turned out to be more of a round table or more of a town hall meeting kind of episode. It wasn't our standard episode. It was more of a casual conversation really about the psychology of the Joker, but also Batman as much as the Joker.
Right.
So that one was a lot of fun. Highly recommend checking that one out if you need an opportunity to get back into the show a little bit like we do. So, I am really happy that we're back and talking. This is certainly a highlight of my week every week, and this just feels good to be back.
Right. It feels normal.
Yeah. Thought I would let you know.
Well, thank you.
Speaking of Comic Fest and that panel, we actually had an email that I think relates pretty well to that episode. And before we get started on this week's episode, I thought maybe I would ask you the question posed in the email. This email is from Charles. The message says, Doc, I was wondering if it makes more sense that someone with PTSD could plead the insanity defense because they could just act out during an attack or spell stemming from their PTSD. How hard would this be for the defendant to prove? Is it possible someone could fake this? Either way, they would spend some time incarcerated in a way, but would mental health professionals be able to determine if they faked it? Which I thought was kind of interesting. One of the questions we had at Comic Fest was looking at the Joker, and is the Joker the way he is because he was born that way, because he was raised that way, or maybe because he had dropped into a vat of chemicals and it's possible that that sort of thing could do it. So what do you think? Yeah,
and that issue came up, that legal question around insanity, that of course, in a court system, there have been some cases where someone who committed a crime, usually a violent crime, would be able to plead insanity and somehow, get away with it. This is a really great question because, when it comes to the legal side, of course, the word insanity, it's not a psychological term. It's not a diagnosis. It's really not a word that I use.
It's something that you said in an earlier episode was a legal term more than anything else.
Correct. So it's used in courts specifically to determine if during the time of the crime, was that person, did they know what they were doing? Were they capable of exercising moral judgment? Or because of whatever mental illness was ailing them, they didn't have capacity to make certain decisions and realize that what they were doing was morally wrong. Now, the truth is, this is probably, research says that particular instance happens less than 1% in terms of cases, and is particularly rare.
So someone actually being found to be quote unquote insane is only about 1% of the time.
It's actually determined not by a psychologist, not by a lawyer, but by the peers, right?
Yeah.
By the jury.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. That happens very rarely, less than 1%. And so we have to think about that as just kind of being indicative that this is not a very commonplace thing, that most of the time people who are being charged with certain crimes, especially violent crimes, the assumption is that even if they have some symptoms of mental illness, whether it's a psychotic disorder or depression. This particular writer who wrote into us talked about PTSD. You can have a mental disorder, you can have symptoms of a mental disorder and still be found guilty for that violent crime because you knew what it is you were doing.
Sure.
So I just wanted to make that clear. The second part of his question, though, is really fascinating. The idea of malingering. Malingering is when somebody pretends to have psychological symptoms in order to get some kind of gain from it, like to get away with a crime or to get some other secondary gain, financial gain, some kind of personal gain. And that is actually something that psychologists, especially forensic psychologists, are able to screen or evaluate depending on certain measures, certain psychological tests, certain ways in which they can read cues, read body language. So they often say, they don't like to tell those secrets. So those details aren't necessarily available to everybody.
Right.
But yes, there are ways in which psychiatrists and forensic psychologists are able to determine whether somebody is malingering. In other words, faking it.
Yeah. That's fascinating. The idea that psychologists have been trained to determine whether, it's almost got a very mentalism sort of act. It's almost got a very, I don't know, reading people, reading gestures, reading the eyes, knowing whether or not someone is lying. But the other thing is, and I say this having been raised in a military family, knowing a lot of military, both active duty and reservists and retirees. I've known people with PTSD. And one very key part of this question, I think, is sort of alluding to the idea that PTSD is grounds for an insanity ruling. You wouldn't generally, someone with PTSD wouldn't necessarily be found to be insane.
Right, in the legal system.
Correct.
Right. And one of the reasons is that, and you're getting at a really important point, which is the people that fake symptoms, for whatever diagnosis, right? The people that are faking symptoms usually get the presentation, the whatever it is that they're faking, they usually get that from the media, from TV, movies, some internet, of course. And usually those presentations, those versions are not accurate.
Right.
So they're, in the literature and from experience as a clinician, the psychological field, we know what symptoms are most common with PTSD and similar disorders. We know what to look for. I think a really good example here is in Summer of Sam, about Son of Sam.
Yeah.
The film is Summer of Sam, but the serial killer was Son of Sam, and he had claimed, once he was caught, he had claimed that he had been hearing voices of a dog, of his neighbor's black Labrador, telling him to kill people. And later, it was revealed that he had made that up.
Right.
That he had created this psychotic disorder in order to get away with the murders that he had committed. And it was interesting that the forensic psychologists had realized that there was an issue because hearing voices, yes, that's part of a psychotic disorder. Part of schizophrenia is hearing voices. But hearing an animal's voice, there are few, if any, cases like that.
Sure.
So that's an example where you would know. That's kind of an odd, even for something like schizophrenia, which is characterized as a very odd disorder, that kind of presentation is extremely rare and pretty unheard of. So that's a red flag. That's something that would not necessarily be seen as genuine. And
someone with PTSD, while they might have physical signs, they might have the tremors, they might have psychological signs, they might have flashbacks or nightmares, or they might have paranoia walking down the street, afraid that a trash can might blow up because of an IED or something like that. That's not necessarily, if that person then goes and kills someone odds are it's something much more than simple PTSD. Not to say that PTSD is simple, but if you go and you begin murdering someone, you can't really blame PTSD for that.
Right.
That's sort of like saying someone with someone on the autistic spectrum is going to go around killing people just because Lenny killed someone in Of Mice and Men.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone with that would go and then start killing people.
Right. And there's this very clear distinction that, again, you can have a mental disorder and commit a crime, and that mental disorder may not be the reason that you committed that crime. It's incredibly hard to make that, to differentiate that. But it's an important point because that's why this is so rare, that oftentimes you can look through the history and find that those particular, mental states that, maybe the defending lawyer is trying to say is the reason may not have existed prior to the violent acts. And actually a case related to Batman is that Colorado shooter.
The guy
last name was Holmes. I can't remember his first name. He had
the one who shot up the movie theater.
Yeah. So at some screening of one of Nolan's films, he had started shooting people, and unfortunately there were deaths involved. And throughout his trial, he was seen as very disorganized, bizarre behavior, bizarre facial expressions. There was unfortunately a linkage. People were associating his behavior with the Joker.
Oh, and here I thought it was, they were blaming the fact that he now had red hair and therefore must be a bad guy.
Right. Well, it could have been that, but it was also his bizarre behavior. But I will say he with his hair being dyed and his appearance kind of being disheveled and strange, taking all of that into account, it was seen as if he had been, struggling with some kind of mental disorder.
Sure.
And he went with that. And, that's another example where it becomes very complicated. It's different in every state, but it becomes complicated when psychologists then have to look into his history and discover and understand, did he have history of mental health treatment? Did he have history of other incidents or events where this would be connected, where they can make that link between what he did and the development of mental health disorder? So it's incredibly complex, but again, it's very rare to be able to make, to be able to pinpoint the particular violent crime with a particular mental health disorder.
Sure. Well, that's cool. And it's always nice if you guys have questions. I highly recommend you give us an email. It's arkhamsessions@gmail.com, or you can go straight to the source and email underthemaskonline.com, or go to underthemaskonline.com and email Drea there. And who knows, we may ask your question here on the show. So I want to go and jump into this week's episode, Tyger. To be perfectly honest, I think we also have to give a little bit of story credit maybe to H.G. Wells. In the late 1890s, H.G. Wells also wrote a little book called The Island of Dr. Moreau. And this story is straight out of those pages. In fact, the book is absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend it if you've not read it.
That's right. This is somewhat of a different take. But it stands apart from other BTAS episodes because, as you said, it's very fantastical.
Sure.
It involves, of course, a lot of, I would say, experimentation, which we've seen before.
Oh yeah.
But in a direction that really leaves a lot open to the imagination.
Well, something that I really appreciated in this particular episode is that it actually calls back to the series pilot. Man Bat was in that one. And that one I thought was a pretty nice take on vivisection and experimenting, trying to crossbreed man with bat, and I thought they handled it really nicely. Now, rather than do something that any other animated series would do, where they just end up reusing a plot, they actually make a direct reference to that episode when they bring our good friend
Dr. Langstrom
back. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's a nice way of handling a similar subject, but also making it clear that this villain is even worse. We're going to go back from the beginning. We start out at the Gotham Zoo, and we're admiring the beautiful Tyger. Selina Kyle is there, checking out the Tyger. A security guard comes in. It's after hours. She's not supposed to be there, but Selina is Selina after all. And suddenly she is tranquilized, and we see that it's sort of this ape-like man who tranquilizes her and takes her away.
I won't let you hurt the Tyger.
I wasn't sent here after the Tyger, lady.
Does away with the security guard, throws him into the...
I believe he was redheaded, so, easily discarded.
Yeah, dismissed easily. So we then cut to Bruce Wayne waiting patiently, I might add, outside the restaurant. Selina is very late, and it's unlike her to be late. And then he finds out that she called ahead and said that she had an appointment to keep at the Gotham Zoo and that she was going to be late. Bruce goes to the zoo and finds the tranquilizer dart. He knows that something is up. This is very much unlike Selina. Or maybe it's a little too much like Selina with her whole Catwoman persona. Maybe it might be that, he doesn't think something's up with her so much as, Selina's off being Catwoman again.
Right.
I got to put an end to this.
Right.
Because if we remember, when we last saw Bruce and Selina as Batman and Catwoman, he didn't necessarily think she was over it.
Right. And he does not agree with her her side gig, her great passion for she is someone who is a rescuer. She will do anything she can, including breaking laws,
Sure,
in order to protect wildlife. And there's something about the way that she, basically her core values, he's not in agreement with her. So I would imagine that part of the reason that he's, I guess, upset that she's missing is that he suspects she's involved with some of her antics again.
Of course, we also know that Bruce is wildly in love with Selina Kyle. Why are they having dinner, Drea? Are they in a business relationship? Are they actually having a date, which would be odd because Selina has made it pretty clear that she's not into him. She likes the Batman, and Bruce knows this. Is he her sponsor of sorts? What's the deal here?
We weren't given much information, so
No.
it's very up in the air.
Yeah, I get this odd feeling. It's like, oh, poor Bruce. He's still trying. You kind of feel for him a little bit. But we cut to, we're there in our villain's lair where Selina has been secured to this upright, for lack of a better word. It's a table, but it's almost like an upright altar, not so dissimilar from the kind of thing you would see in King Kong, where she is about to be sacrificed to Kong. And suddenly we are introduced to Tigress, who is this very humanoid, gray, cat-like man.
Yeah, he looks like a ferocious werewolf cat. We get the sense that, he's dangerous.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that then we are introduced to Dr. Dorian, who in fact is the villain here.
Sure. And Dorian has chosen Selina to be his next experiment. He makes it very clear that Tigress is an experiment of Dorian's and a very successful attempt at creating a cat-man creature.
I've chosen you for my next experiment, Selina Kyle. or perhaps I should say, Catwoman.
What's interesting is that you're not necessarily sure if it's for him and science and his experiments, or if it's specifically a Bride of Frankenstein sort of situation where he is creating a mate for Tigress. Mm-hmm. And it's possible that he's doing a little of both. But we cut to Bruce investigating this character. He's looking for the villain, and he actually goes back to a former villain, Dr. Langstrom, where Langstrom identifies Dorian as the potential Dr. Moreau type character.
Mm-hmm.
He likes cats better than people, won't experiment on them.
Right. So you have this, they were colleagues. Dr. Langstrom seemed to have a bat fetish, and then Dr. Dorian had his cat thing. There was something about the experimentation where I think there was some suspicion around what Dr. Dorian was doing, and so he then just disappeared.
Sure.
And we learned he had created his own lab in this island. And was...
Like you do.
I know.
There are all kinds of islands just lying about.
And he's basically this crazy cat man just creating these beings, these cat-like beings. Mm-hmm. We see later there's like a monkey cat. There's a flying cat.
There's a cat with wings, yeah.
So there are all these different cat versions. And you just, you get the sense that, like Langstrom, this scientist has this particular focus, this particular interest in cats. And Langstrom described what his interest was in bats. He said bats were superior to humans. They have these superior abilities. And so we got the sense that he was trying to become a bat in order to become superior to humans. With Dr. Dorian, it's a little different. He has the same fascination with these creatures,
but he's not willing to try it on himself. He's more likely to try it on other people and animals, because we learn basically that Tigress was always this cat that had been turned into this humanoid cat character, creature. Meanwhile, Batman infiltrates the island, and we very quickly learned that Dorian has already started experimenting with Selena, and now she is far more feline-like. She is all covered in... She is basically a human cat. She has the face of a cat. She's walking around but she's walking like a human, and she's talking and she still has her cognitive abilities as any human would. At least until Dorian gets that last injection in. The one that holds her in that likeness. Mm-hmm. It's always something. It's always like, well, if we could just get that last treatment in before Batman stops them and gets the antidote, everything would be fine. But there's just no breaks for villains.
No,
especially villains who, by the way, redhead.
Dr. Dorian is a lab coat wearing flaming redhead.
Yes.
He's very eccentric. He's very passionate about his work. He's been on this. We get the sense he's been on this island, spending all this time with these different, creatures, these different cat people that he's created. So he's not quite human himself. He's quite odd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Batman ends up fighting Tigress, and we find out that Tigress is basically the ultimate life form. He is superior to any human. He's got the strength, he's got the prowess, he's got the agility. He's basically everything I guess Batman would almost like to be, but a cat and not a human taking a bat form. It's
right.
He is quite monstrous and really kind of throws Batman for a loop. I mean, they go at it for a little while.
Go back to the enclosure.
What am I?
Selena's being kept in a cage.
Yes.
She's certainly
sort of a glass. It's basically a giant terrarium.
Right. Right. And she's trying to be convinced of this treatment. You know, Dr. Dorian is explaining to her that she will be so powerful, she'll be graceful beyond her wildest dreams, that what he's doing for her is a favor. That once she gets all these treatments, she will be she will reach the full potential as a cat woman, literally. And he's almost he almost believes that she wants this.
Yeah.
And I think some part of her
Might even.
well, partly because she has received some of the treatments, so her brain is adjusting to becoming, a cat's brain. But also that there may be some truth to what he's saying. You have been in this human body, you've been struggling to survive in this human body, something's not quite right. This could solve all your problems. You could live out your wildest dreams as this cat human person. And I think that some part of her believes that he's right.
Sure. I think it's very possible. Batman is taken away and he is then given a head start. Like, we're going to take him away. Okay, Tigress, you give him a head start, and then Tigress is going after you, and he is going to hunt you down,
right,
and kill you, and everything is going to be awesome. Selena will then be a cat. Tigress will continue being my ultimate human-cat hybrid, and the Batman will be dead. So Batman is sent off into the jungle. Tigress is unleashed, both to test his strength and his agility and all of his feral qualities. Batman actually ends up trapping Tigress. And this is around the time that we start to get the sense that Tigress isn't necessarily a bad guy. Selena ends up escaping. She finds Batman, and then Tigress appears, and once again Selena stops him. And
Stop, Tigress! Don't hurt him.
Why?
Batman's done nothing to you.
He's my enemy, and my father's enemy. When I prove I'm best, you'll be mine.
No, I can't be one like that.
And this gives something for Tigress to think about.
Well, and I don't think it's just a matter of I choose Batman over you. I think it's a matter of I choose my human form and my human life.
Yeah.
Rather than to live with you or to live my life as essentially a cat-human hybrid.
And once again, we see in any situation like this, in fact, not so dissimilar from Dr. Moreau himself, we find out that Dorian is rather abusive toward Tigress. He doesn't understand, or he's infuriated that Tigress didn't kill Batman when he had the opportunity. Batman goes after Dorian, and Tigress is like, no, this is the person that raised me, created me, raised me. I'm going to defend him. He might be wrong, but he's my father.
Right.
Then he ends up defending Batman against Dorian, and he turns on the father. And Dorian, is really upset by this. They end up destroying the lab, and everyone believes that Tigress and Dorian are both dead. Tigress actually ends up coming out of the flaming lab with Dorian in his arms, makes it clear that he's not dead, and gives him over to Batman so that Batman can take him away. And Tigress again tries to bring her on his side.
Batman, the antidote. I'll be stuck like this forever.
Would that be so bad? You could stay here with me.
Oh, Tigress. I can't live like this. I have to be human again.
Goodbye, Selena.
And he reveals that he was holding one of the vials of antidote, gives it to Selena, and of course, that's going to make her all better.
Yeah.
She says,
Won't you come with us? There's nothing for you here.
There's nothing for me anywhere.
So he is completely alienated from the world. Talk a little bit about Tigress. This person who has been raised for this one thing. has this belief system that he needs to defend the person that created him, even though he doesn't necessarily know why. And then when he begins to reason the whole thing out, realizes that he's wrong. And then in the end, maybe feels like there's nothing out there for him.
Right. Well, I saw the ending as somewhat, very saddening, because it's Tyger actually who destroys the lab. He sets everything on fire. And it was at the realization that his father, Dr. Dorian, the man who created him, is immoral. That he's essentially, what he's doing not only is wrong, but it's harmful to people. And that there was almost this hope that by bringing in Catwoman and transforming her into a Catwoman, that maybe Tigress would be able to have a companion. And I think that the realization that all of this is for, a very dark, very immoral, and destructive reason, that he turns, as you said, he turns on Dr. Dorian and he destroys the entire lab, and he walks away from, I think Batman even offers him, why don't you come with us? There's a chance for you. And he rejects that. And I think it's because all he knows is what his father had raised him with. He had this kind of like a child, he had been developing these values and these morals, and it's been completely torn apart. So he's very confused, of course, and he's very disappointed, and I think there's a huge sense of disillusionment. I thought this was utopia. I thought that we were superior in our genetics, in our creation, and now I'm realizing I'm this experiment. And it was Batman who I think throughout their fighting, as an insult, had said that his father was a test tube, that you come from this experiment, which was really devaluing to him, to Tigress. So I think it's meant to be a sad story. I think we're meant to feel quite badly for Tigress, and it's almost a lesson for us that those who are on this quest for perfection and superiority, especially when it comes to a comparison to other people, are going to find that it's disappointing, that you will be disillusioned, and that in fact you'll hurt people in the end. And this is that kids show version of that, right?
Sure. Describe the difference between Dorian and Langstrom, because the two of them are essentially doing the same things, but there is a significant difference there.
Right. So Man-Bat and Dr. Dorian, why isn't he Catman or Man-Cat?
Yeah.
Well, whatever the case, Dr. Dorian and Dr. Langstrom have very similar delusions of grandeur. And we might even say, I think we talked about this with Man-Bat when we went over that episode, that it's possible he has what we would call a delusional disorder, that he has this strong conviction that he's superior to other humans, that he has this undiscovered ability, and that he needs to let everyone know how amazing he is. And of course, that's far from the truth, right? That's a break from reality, one would say. So the same is true with Dr. Dorian. While what he's doing is incredible and probably required a lot of talent, it's actually quite bizarre and quite harmful. And the difference, it's interesting. Dr. Langstrom was turning into a bat, and his efforts were to become the superior being. And Dr. Dorian's efforts were all around creating a superior creature that would be in a relationship with him. Essentially, Tigress is the son he created to have a relationship with. And whenever, of course, you ask me about anything, I often think about motivation. So my questions around Dr. Dorian would be, why does he need to create this creature to have a relationship with? What is it about humans and connecting with humans that he has difficulty tolerating, or that he finds hurtful, or that he finds, uncomfortable? There's something about humans that he doesn't want to have. He doesn't want to have a relationship with other humans. And we get the sense that he wants to surround himself with cats. He's this cat man. So then my question would be,
the crazy cat man?
The crazy cat man, not to be confused with the crazy cat lady.
Right.
So what is it about cats that's fascinating to Dr. Dorian? And he mentioned,
I've made her what she always wanted to be. I've given her power and grace beyond her wildest dreams.
and later when he's describing Tigress and the fall of Tigress, right? Tigress betraying him, he said,
I only wanted you to be strong, to show no weakness, no pity.
so he seems to see cats as having a very kind of strong emotional makeup, you know, that cats don't have weaknesses, that they're not able to be, I don't know, they're not able to be manipulated by other people.
Well, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that cats are sort of their own independent creatures.
Absolutely.
Unlike dogs, they have a tendency to, they don't necessarily care that you're in the room unless they want something from you or unless they're particularly affectionate. But they've got this, there's this stereotype of cats that they couldn't care less that you're there. They don't need you. They are perfect. They are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, of cleaning themselves, of finding their own food. They are natural hunters. They are perfect. And I think Dorian takes that to the nth degree.
Right, exactly. That's what he's looking for. And that's what he wants to be surrounded with. And so it's interesting that he says he wanted Tigress to lack pity. And I wonder if it has to do with how Dr. Dorian feels about himself. That he wants to be around others who wouldn't judge him, who wouldn't pity him, and vice versa, right?
Right.
That he wouldn't want to feel that way about other people.
Interesting.
So it's, I found that line to be, incredibly touching. And the irony, of course, is that he wanted Tigress to be loyal to him. Mm-hmm. Unlike, we think of dogs and other animals as being more loyal. And, Tigress, being a cat, was not. He wasn't loyal to him in the end.
Yeah. He was almost even more in touch with his humanity than his cat side. There was once he began to understand where Batman and Selina were coming from, he began to feel those emotions that he had never been given the opportunity to feel before.
Right.
And he was able to choose his own loyalty, which wasn't with Dorian. And it's a very sad ending, but it's very good. And it's not necessarily it's exactly the kind of adventure story you would expect from a cartoon. Mm-hmm. But everything behind it, the morality and the, even the vivisection to some degree, it's not something that you would necessarily expect in an animated series for children.
Right. And at the end of the episode, we hear Batman reciting Blake's Tyger, Tyger poem.
Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, is what the episode is named after, is this 18th century poem describing this strong regal tiger, and I wonder what your thoughts were about that. Why is this episode named Tiger, Tiger? What is the relationship to that original poem?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, William Blake, who wrote the poem, The Tyger, I don't know. I think it very well could be this idea of why would God create this character or this creature that is both immaculate, beautiful, and this amazing creature, and yet so ferocious and so deadly. When they talk about thy fearful symmetry, it's right. I mean, he's got the good and the bad there, and it's a good question. What do you think?
It's funny because kids watching this may not realize this is probably one of the most well-known poems from this artist, from this writer. And it comes out of a series of poems that is essentially this poet wondering about creation,
right,
and asking why, why this creature, as you said, this beautiful creature was created, because it is so dangerous, it is so ferocious and deadly. And how am I to coexist? What am I to this animal? And, it's just an interesting reference to throw into this episode.
So as the psychologist, once Batman takes Dorian back to Gotham, and although I don't know why Gotham is necessarily the area of jurisdiction, I don't know why you would necessarily, since he's on this island. I guess because he took Selina from Gotham. But once Batman takes Dorian back to Gotham, presumably puts him in Arkham, because that's where they put them. As a psychologist, what do you do with Dorian from that point forward?
Well, where was Dr. Langstrom? Was he just out and about doing his thing?
Yeah.
The same.
Well, because they didn't. If you remember on Leather Wings, Batman gave Langstrom the antidote and brought him back to his fiance.
Right. He didn't take him to Arkham. It's really interesting because with Langstrom, you have an example of somebody who was committing the crimes, within this state, this delusional state, or even this transformation where he was man-bat. So he was unable to have the decision-making, capabilities that a human would have.
Right.
So I could understand that in that scenario, you wouldn't necessarily commit him to Arkham or incarcerate him at Blackgate.
Sure.
Whereas with Dr. Dorian, he's clearly, willingly, kidnapping people and experimenting on them and potentially harming them. And I think that there you have enough evidence to, unfortunately, to even put him in Blackgate.
Right. But do you put him in Blackgate, or is this guy a little off his rocker? Do you put that guy in Blackgate, or do you put him in Arkham?
Well, the question you're essentially asking is there some kind of intervention for him?
Yeah. What kind of treatment would a psychologist give to a guy who has begun experimenting on humans and animals?
Well, the first thing, of course, is stabilization and ensuring safety. So when you incarcerate or you hospitalize anybody, you will immediately lift any of those risks, right? He won't have access to his lab. He won't have access or won't have the ability to kidnap people and to harm them. But then I would ask some questions, why was he doing this to begin with? What's missing? Does he simply need a cat?
I was gonna ask. Now here's a question. We've seen at Arkham they have a tendency. The Joker is given his playing cards. Ivy is given a potted plant. Harvey is allowed his two-sided coin.
Right.
Really bad idea. But
I know.
The Scarecrow is basically allowed to keep wearing the costume of the Scarecrow. Now, do you give Dorian a cat?
I have no evidence that he would harm the cat. Right? I only have evidence that he would actually see a companion in this cat.
Well, he might harm him if you consider animal testing, like
but we won't give him access to those tools and those techniques, right? Like he won't have a lab to work out of. So as long as we don't have evidence that he would hurt the animal within, of course, the rules and regulations of Arkham, which we don't fully know that.
Right. There are no rules and regulations. It's all anarchy at Arkham.
I would say it's probably appropriate, but I would dig deeper and understand what his motivations were. Mm-hmm. And, there is some hope, especially if he does have this particular singular delusion. is there a way to do some reality testing with him and to maybe validate for him that he can still be important, he can still contribute to the scientific society, but that what he was doing was harming people and animals. And I think ultimately, I don't think he wants to harm animals. And yes, he did want to harm people, but I think that even with that motivation, there are some interventions that could be helpful for him that involve, some teaching empathy, some, social skills, certainly access to maybe group therapy and other ways to connect with other folks at Arkham so that he can kind of reintegrate back. Because remember, he was living on this island.
Yes.
So he has to reintegrate back into the human social environment.
Yeah. And it's an environment that I don't know that he would necessarily do all that well. I mean, he was literally surrounded by these humanoid, apes.
Right.
And cats and, cat-like creatures that could fly or could, do whatever.
Right. And frankly, it's not a crime to not interact with humans. If he is released and he wants to live with animals, that's certainly not a crime.
Right.
I will say I'm a little bit disappointed in the episode only in that we didn't know who Dr. Dorian really was before the island.
Yeah.
And, sometimes the episodes do give us more. With Harvey Dent, Two-Face, with Mad Hatter, with other villains, we're given a little bit more, a little bit of their history and some events that are helpful to understand them. And we're missing that here. So I kind of wish that we had that.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing. Oh, by the way, what I really appreciated about this particular episode is the idea that they brought back Langstrom, mostly because once again they brought back his voice, Mark Singer, who was also known as Dar, the Beastmaster. So I appreciated, and you've recently seen the Beastmaster.
Yes.
And so I appreciate the fact that we got to have the Beastmaster in an episode with
Beast. Wait, the Beastmaster is the guy with the two little weasels, right?
They're ferrets, Kodo and Podo.
Okay. Yes, I do remember watching this.
Yes. But I liked that you've got Mark Singer in an episode with a guy who used to turn himself into a bat. You got another guy who is turning cats into men and women into cats, and he's the Beastmaster. That's awesome. Maybe it's just my thing. And of course, as always, whenever there's an opportunity, I like to talk a little bit about real life examples of the sorts of things that we're seeing in these episodes. And of course, we've not come across anyone who has created beast-like men, at least not yet. But vivisection is a real thing, and it's been a real thing for a long time.
Well, you've mentioned vivisection several times. Do you want to just explain what that is for folks who may not have heard that term before?
Well, sure. Vivisection is essentially experimentation on live beings. So if you are experimenting on a human being, and we're talking like surgical.
Right.
So it's not simple like the kind of stuff you do, Doc. We're talking like you have put someone down on a table and you've taken a scalpel and you've attached something to them, or you've grown something on them, or you've done things that are weird. And a lot of times animals are used for this. There are specific regulations for doing this. This sort of testing isn't illegal per se. There's actually a lot of medical benefit to testing this, doing tests on animals and maybe even humans down the line. Of course, there are stories of all of the horrendous vivisection experiments done in war times. So like Nazi Germany, Japan had an infamous just ream of tests and experiments that were done on humans that are just absolutely atrocious. I don't recommend looking them up. But those sorts of things are crimes against nature. The things that are allowed today are things like people growing human ears on a mouse.
Mm-hmm.
things like that. You were given the opportunity to possibly help human beings down the line by doing these experiments. And folks like Dr. Moreau, folks like Dr. Dorian, folks like Dr. Langstrom, taking it too far. But, that's neither here nor there.
That is here. I think that is relevant.
It's here, and it might even be there.
It's both here and there.
Yeah. So these tests are being done in labs all over the world. Like I've said, there are mice out there with human ears on their backs, and that's vivisection. It's done all the time. So a little something to think about. Maybe one day there will be a cat that is humanoid and can speak and all of that. Then we'll finally know what they want.
They'll also need a lot of psychotherapy because both Tigress and Catwoman, as she was, within the transformation, they were not doing well psychologically.
Well, now that's an interesting question, and it's something that I would like to ask. What happens to Selena Kyle now? Once she's given the antidote, once she becomes Selena again, clearly she's going to be messed up. She was leading into this, the brain of a cat, certainly the body of a cat. What do you do to help her through this?
Well, any kind of physical change, any transformation, any injury, anything like that, I would consider potentially it would be a traumatic experience, right? A trauma being an event that is life-threatening or can pose to someone, serious injury. So though that could very well have happened to her where her life was in danger or she was seriously threatened by this and her worldview changes a bit. And I think anyone exposed to what Dr. Dorian was doing and to Tigress's experience would be quite moved by that, and may require some psychotherapy or some time to heal from that. So I would be very concerned about her well-being.
I would be too. And I'm sure Bruce is.
Oh gosh.
It's all about Selena. Next week, we've got Moon of the Wolf.
More beasts.
Yeah, more beasts. Maybe we'll have more Mark Singer. Maybe Mark Singer will come back. He's the Beastmaster. How can you go wrong? So that's next week, Moon of the Wolf. Till then, Drea, where can people find you online?
Best way to interact with me is through Twitter. I'm at Arkham Asylum Doc. I also have a website, underthemaskonline.com. Of course, all the Arkham Session episodes are up on that website, but there are other very interesting posts and articles related to comics that you can find there.
Absolutely. And you can find us both through email. We are arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter. We are at Arkham Sessions. And you can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. Apologetically, I've not been online much over the last couple of weeks, but I promise to get back to it, and you'll be able to speak with me if you've got comments, questions. I'm happy to talk to you.
It's been a rough few days, but I'm happy to be back with you, and I look forward to the many, many episodes we'll be doing together. And I just want to say thank you to the kind messages and comments we've been getting, and especially to some more questions that we've had over the couple of weeks that we've been on hiatus. So thank you for those.
Thank you, everyone. Till next week, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
the Arkham Sessions.